Bethune, thank you so much. We are just so delighted. Those of you who were able to hear the first presentation Nancy gave us were so excited and kept telling me they were very interested in a follow-on with this presentation about Mary McLeod Bethune's friends who will join. She will be joining in Statuary Hall. So Nancy, for the don't know who she is. She is a community Mary McLeod Bethune Statuary Fund project. This project to place the first statue of an African-American woman in National Statuary Hall in Washington, D.C. has been an historic endeavor on her part. She feels it's the most important of her works. She also served on the Capital Campaign Chair of Lohman Memorial Art Museum and Gardens and has successfully raised $4 million, all during the COVID pandemic. She is a board member of the newly expanded Halifax Humane Society, where she chaired a $3.8 million renovation project and assisted her husband Lowell in opening this past year the Halifax Health Lohman Diabetes Center. I don't know where she finds all the time because she is also chair of the Council on Aging of Volusia County. Nancy and her family were formerly the owners of Lohman Funeral Homes, Cemeteries, and Cremation, the largest privately owned and operated funeral and cemetery business in Florida. Nancy and her husband are currently developing the Cupola at Oceanside, a luxury townhouse project. She and her husband Lowell and their son Ty have owned over 4,000 apartments. She was selected as the recipient of the Ohio State University Distinguished the Daytona Chamber of Commerce Community Leadership Award, and the Council on Aging Humanitarian Award. In 1981, she was selected Ohio State University Homecoming Queen. She and her husband Lowell have donated over $12 million to those charities that she is passionately serving. And we are so delighted to have her with us this evening. Nancy.
Thank you very much. I'm going to do a screen share, and I don't know if you'll be able to see me and my screen, but if not, the most important, I think, will be the screen. Carla, thank you for that lovely introduction. And Anne, are you ready for me to screen share?
I am.
Okay, here we go. Okay, can everyone see that my screen?
They should. They're all on mute, but I can see it. I'm assuming they can.
Great. Okay. So thanks for having me this evening to share with you a little bit about the other 9 women in Statuary Hall. As all of you know from my last presentation, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune will be the first African-American within the collection of the 100 statues that represent all 50 represent the 50 states of the United States. She will be the 10th woman. And so it's my pleasure this evening to provide you some information, really interesting anecdotes about the other 9 women and one other important monument that I want to share some very fascinating history about. Okay, let's see. There we go. Just as a review, the National Statuary Hall began accepting statues from the different states in the United States in 1864. Those statues are allowed to be 11 feet tall. They're both allowed to be in marble and in bronze. The statues first were brought in to Statuary Hall, but soon they recognized that they would overflow into other areas of the U.S. Capitol. So now they are among many places within the Capitol. This is a schematic. You've seen this before perhaps, but I wanted to show you where the rotunda in the center of the Capitol is and where Statuary Hall is to the left of it. That is the room that will be the room where Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune will be unveiled in and will stay permanently in. That picture is at the bottom left of your screen. That's perhaps the best photograph of Statuary Hall on my screen currently. As I mentioned, there are 6 statues in the rotunda. Those are all US presidents, 13 in the crypt, 13 in the Hall of Columns. That's to the left. As you walk into the rotunda, it's to the left of Statuary Hall, and 24 in the Capitol Visitor Center and 9 are in other areas. All 100 statues became the property of the U.S. Capitol, architect of the Capitol, in 2005, when the final 100th statue was placed by the state of New Mexico. But interestingly enough, in the year 2000, they started to have conversations about replacing statues. Thank goodness, right? That we have had some really great achievements by different individuals in different states. And so some of those have been replaced. As an example, California was one of the first to replace a statue because they recognized that they would like to honor President Reagan as one of their 2 statues representing their state. There are some people who say, wait a minute, Nancy, there are 4 other statues of African Americans. And so those are 3 are busts of African Americans. Those are Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, Sojourner Truth. And then, of course, there's the statue of Rosa Parks. And she is in Statuary Hall, but she represents all of the United States and was commissioned by President Obama in 2013. Now, we've talked about this, I think, in my last presentation, but just as a refresher, why are we so thankful? Our other statue that will remain in the U.S. Capitol is Dr. John Gorey, and it is because he invented air conditioning. So we are all so thankful for that air conditioning that that his statue was placed in 1914, and there is certainly many people who feel he should remain in the U.S. Capitol as one of the 2 greatest Floridians in our history. Now, the other statue I mentioned of the one of the women in Statuary Hall, not one of the other 9, but one of the other statues is in fact Rosa Parks. And so I just wanted to show you this picture of John Gorey, who is in Statuary Hall currently. And let's see, it would be to his right is Rosa Parks, who is of course sitting on a bus bench seat. And there's a picture down at the bottom of President Obama and some of our other congressional elected officials as they are unveiling the statue. Okay, so this is one of the statues that I'm excited to tell you about because I think you'll be as fascinated as I was about this. And at first, I'll be honest with you, I didn't believe that this is actually true, what I'm about to share with you. But then I looked at who the author was who wrote the publication that I read, and it's an author within the Smithsonian Institute. So I feel like this is a fascinating story, a sad story actually, but one that I think you'll appreciate learning about. So all of you know who these women are. You know who Elizabeth Stanton is, you know who Lucretia Mott is, and you know who Susan B. Anthony is, right? They are really the women recognized for leading the suffragette movement. Well, listen to this. After the 19th Amendment was passed, 70 different organizations, predominantly women's organizations, got together and said, let's honor these 3 women who fought so relentlessly for us women, for the women in our country to have the right to vote. So they created this bust where they sort of rise out of this block of marble, a block of marble similar to the block, a little smaller, of course, but similar to the block of marble that was the original state of marble that Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune was carved from. They had put on the monument itself, they had put on the inscription, women first denied a soul, then called mindless, now arisen, declaring herself an entity to be reckoned. That monument was delivered and unveiled 6 months after the passing of the 19th Amendment. The next day, Congress passed passed the legislation to scrape that off, that phrase off of that, and move the monument downstairs to the crypt. It went into the broom closet with the rest of the brooms and mops that cleaned the U.S. Capitol. I cannot make this up, and I can't even believe that this happened. And in 1921, this happened, and this statue did not come out. That they did not even open the closet door until women like all of you said, this is not acceptable. And they insisted that that closet be open. They insisted that crypt be opened, cleaned, and allowed people to see this monument and pay tribute to these three women who led the suffragette movement. So this was in 1963 that this happened. It remained in that closet, granted with the doors open. It remained in that closet until once again, people rose to the occasion and said, this is not appropriate for this statue to be in a broom closet. This statue needs to come back upstairs. And now it proudly resides, without the inscription, it proudly resides in the rotunda. Now, this did not take place until 1997. And even though the architect of the Capitol, the Library of Congress, has something like a $20 to $30 million annual budget, at the time, Newt Gingrich was speaker, and he refused to support dollars being sent to move this statue. So again, $75,000 had to be raised in order to move this statue into the rotunda. And sure enough, on May 14th, 1997, it was finally moved and once again provided for all of the visitors to the U.S. Capitol to appreciate. Isn't that a sad but fascinating story, and the wherewithal that individuals continued to fight for the recognition of what these three women did for all of us. Now, I'm going to proceed in telling you about the 9 women that are in Statuary Hall, in addition to, or that will be the neighbors of Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. So let's start with someone that we all know and is near and dear to our hearts because she was such a champion despite the things that she wasn't given as natural gifts that most of us take for granted. So we all know Helen Keller. She represents the state of Alabama. She was deaf and blind, as you all know, and she is standing there with the pump with the water coming out, because it wasn't until she was 20 that she began to be able to speak, read, and write based on the touch, let me think how you say it, the touch method of teaching someone who is deaf and blind to speak and to read. And so that was the first word that she learned to write, read, and say was the word water. And as you all know, she went on to graduate from college. She went on to be a lecturer and a political activist, and really championed the rights for the physically handicapped. And then there's Florence Sabin of Colorado. Florence Sabin is to this day, many of the healthcare policies, maybe not policies as much as the public healthcare system, was based on the research and the recommendations of Florence Sabin. She was a remarkable woman who was a pioneer in science. She graduated from Johns Hopkins Medical School. She was in the department, she was the head at the Department of Medical Research at the Rockefeller Medical Research Institute, and was inducted into the National Academy of Science as a lifetime member. So she really changed the public healthcare system in the United States. She was really the founder of the public healthcare system. And then we have Frances Willard. Gosh, she had kind of a conflicted life, I must tell you, when I read about her. She championed the temperance movement, prohibition, but she championed women's suffrage, the women's right to vote movement. And I say that she was conflicted on that because what happened to her was that these strong alcohol manufacturing companies fought against the women's right to vote because they were fighting against prohibition. And so the suffragette movement and the prohibition movement, because they were linked together and championed together by Frances Willard, was a real difficult situation. She never lived to see prohibition. As you know, that was the 18th Amendment that I believe, right, was passed in 1921. And they, of course, as all of you know, and all of you, some of you are celebrating that tonight in this program. And not to mention any names, Anne, but some of us enjoy a nice glass of wine. So we're, I think, very thankful that for the 21st Amendment. She died in 1898. And so she never saw prohibition come to fruition. But she did succeed in changing the age of consent in many states, the age of being able to imbibe. And she also worked very hard on changing labor laws. So she had her hand in a lot of different pots. She was the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Union that existed until prohibition. And then that sort of died down because they thought they had, of course, achieved that goal, which they did. But then, as we all know, in 1933, the 21st Amendment repealed that. And now we have Maria Sanford of Minnesota. And she was a school principal. She went on to be the first female college professor. And she founded the PTA organization that still, of course, thrives in schools across the country. So she was a real champion for educational access and the support of education. And she did tremendous work with the Native Americans and the African American communities within her home communities within Minnesota. She was known as a great speech maker. So if you have a chance to ever listen to her speeches, she gave over 1,000 speeches on all of her causes, particularly the support of education. Just as Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune said, I leave you with a thirst for education. Certainly Maria Sanford walked those same, in that same path and in that same vein as someone who was not only highly patriotic, but highly involved in encouraging better education and accessible education for all. And now we have Jeanette Rankin. Jeanette Rankin, she's an interesting woman as well. She was first elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. Get this, she was elected to the House of Representatives when she was 36, 4 years before women had the right to vote. So she was working on legislation when we ourselves couldn't support that legislation by voting for it. I mean, what a difficult situation that had to have been. Her downfall, and I don't really want to say her downfall because it was her right certainly to vote in whichever way she felt compelled to do, but she wasn't reelected after that term when she was 36 because she lobbied so much for that. Her platform was really peace and women's rights, a peaceful world and women's rights. So she could not support going to war under any circumstances. And so she voted against the United States participating in World War I. And then so let me think for a minute, make sure I have this right. Yes, she voted against World War I, ran for election, and then lost. And then when she was 60 years old, believe it or not, she ran again and won. So here she is, so many years later, running for office, won the seat as a U.S. representative from at that moment in time as 60. But guess what? She was called on once again to vote whether or not the U.S. should go to war in World War II. And what did she do? She had to say, I could never vote to go to war. I cannot condone war under any circumstances. And she voted against it. And again, that really ended her opportunities for reelection. So an interesting woman, obviously very strong in her convictions, but a huge women's rights and social justice rights activist all her life. Next, we have Sarah Winnemucca. Sarah Winnemucca was of the Paiute, that's how you pronounce it, the Paiute tribe. But the interesting thing about her is she was from a mixed marriage originally. So she was born an American. She and so she was taught English. So she just didn't only speak the language of her tribe. She also spoke English. And so she worked really tirelessly for the peaceful negotiations between the Paiute tribe and the U.S. Army and the government. And there were lots of tragic stories throughout her life. I mean, this poor woman had to, she was a lot of times questioned about her, whether or not she had the Paiute tribe's back or not, because she didn't always garner the outcome of the negotiations she worked so hard for. So it was a really tough life. At one point, there was something like 350 tribes people, families that were uprooted and sent further west into Washington. And it was really painful for her. But of course, she never gave up. She started schools for the Native Americans. She authored quite a few books and wrote those both in English and in the tribal language. So she had a very, very tough life though, but persevered her entire life to continue to make life better for her tribes people, the Paiute tribe. They're in Nevada. And then we come to someone you'll all recognize. Of course, we know her by two different names, right? Sacagawea and then Sacagawea. All of us typically refer to her as Sacagawea, but she was originally of the Shoshone Indian tribe. And you probably all know this story, that she had been kidnapped, then she was traded to a Frenchman, Jean-Pierre Chaperet, and she, pardon me, I don't probably have his name. It wasn't on the tip of my tongue to say correctly, so I apologize. So she was sold to him. And so then they were both, because he was French speaking, Lewis and Clark entrusted them to help them. And she was instrumental in Lewis and Clark's expedition because she was a guide and she was an interpreter and a translator and a diplomat. And more than anything, she was a diplomat for Lewis and Clark. She led the way and helped them have conversations and negotiations and dialogue, more than anything, I guess is the right word, dialogue with tribes people along their journey down the Columbia in search of what we know today as Astoria, right? The mouth of the Columbia River into the Pacific Ocean, I mean. And they all talked about her indomitable spirit, but more than anything, if you read the Lewis and Clark books about their expedition, they talk so much about her peacekeeping and her gentle way of creating tranquility among the tribes people that Lewis and Clark met along their journey. And then there was Mother Joseph Washington. Now, this woman I did not know of, and my sister lives out in the Pacific Northwest. And so I asked her, and of course they were like, oh yeah, they study her in school. So I was glad to hear that her grandchildren all were aware of who Mother Joseph is. But she was also an amazing woman. She was highly skilled as an architect. So she was schooled in Canada, came to Washington, originally from British Columbia. She was a licensed, skilled architect in British Columbia, came into religious life and became a sister of charity, but then used her skill as an architect to champion what they needed in the Pacific Northwest and raised money for hospitals and schools and orphanages. So a really remarkable woman who took her skill set as an architect, her savviness as a businesswoman, and then her love of charitable giving to make the world a better place for others, and did all of that within the state of Washington. So you can see we have women from all over the United States that are recognized as these real pioneers, because many of them, as you can see, were placed in National Statuary Hall at the turn of the century, or just after the turn of the century, but many had worked tirelessly during the late 1800s and early 1900s. So it's interesting that we have so many amazing women in the history of our country that have now since by their own states been recognized. Although I know what you're thinking, we still only have 10% of the statues in National Statuary Hall. So, but we are working on that. I'm going to share with you in just a moment some new statues that will soon be unveiled. Now, here is Esther Hobart Morris, and she is from Wyoming. She was appointed the first Justice of the Peace and oversaw something like, gosh, what was it? 70 plus cases in front of her that she ruled on as a Justice of the Peace. She was very active in the anti-slavery movement and also very active in the women's rights movements. Really interesting woman. What happened to her? She was married, lost her husband. He owned property in Illinois. I believe it was Illinois. She went to Illinois to handle his estate and realized that she had almost no rights as a woman to own her deceased husband's property. And that, of course, upset her so much that she began working on legislation to change the way in which we can own property and inherit property, that we can control and own our property together with our spouses, and own it independently, and whether or not it's independently owned or mutually owned, that we have the right to inherit that property from when we lose our spouse. So she was a very savvy businesswoman in that sense, and of course, attorney as well. And she also championed equal pay, particularly when it came to teachers. So she believed in fair and accessible education, and also worked hard to provide equal pay for the teachers who were female teachers. And now we come to Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. I think I'm doing okay on time, I hope. So I have a couple updates since my last presentation. I would like all of you to know that Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune will be unveiled on July 13th of 2022. So you might say, well, why July 13th, Nancy? Well, Mary McLeod Bethune's birth date is July 10th. And I was encouraged, I'll put it that way. I was encouraged to tie the date of the unveiling with a significant date. in history. Well, of course, when we started to think about dates this past January and February, we thought, well, let's look at what dates are out there, that we can hang our hat on. And her death date is May 18th. So that was the original date we asked for, because we thought, what a beautiful symbolic opportunity that is to say the day that she actually officially passed her torch, because she passed away, and the day that we then had the opportunity then to carry her torch with her last will and testament, right? I leave you the desire to live harmoniously with one another. I leave you racial dignity. I leave you peace, hope, courage. I leave you the desire to live harmoniously with one another. I leave you, finally, she said, and finally, I leave you a responsibility to our young people. And so here we are carrying that torch. Well, what happened was they said that they still, to this day, because of COVID, and I'm sure in part because of the insurrection, but honestly, it's mostly because of COVID, the Capitol has been closed since 2020 and has not reopened for broad access events. And so they have no intention of opening it in May right now. And so I was encouraged to choose an alternate date. So I went to our board, shared that, and our board voted. I don't choose this, our board of directors does, but our board voted to request July 13th. And that had also been suggested to us as a consideration. So July 10th is her birthday. That's a Sunday. We knew that we were most likely, the unveilings are typically, Statuary Hall presentations are typically done on Wednesdays because Congress is in session. They fly in and fly out, so they are there for sure on Wednesdays. So that's the day, 11 o'clock, and we in the morning, and we hope. And I don't even want to use the word hope, because I am absolutely committed to ensuring that this is broadcast on C-SPAN, maybe a live feed, but I believe it should be broadcast on C-SPAN, so that I know that all of you, no matter where you are in this country of ours, you can tune in and watch that unveiling ceremony. There will be a number of other events by other organizations that surround that unveiling ceremony. That's very exciting. But then let me tell you, she will be the first African-American, male or female, to represent a state in the state collection in those 100 statues, 2 from each state. But let me share with you real quickly the other 2 women who will soon be unveiled following Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. And those are Arkansas, and that's Virginia. And you probably have read about the state of Virginia removing Robert E. Lee. That got a lot of press, right? In the state of Arkansas, Arkansas is placing another African-American woman. They're placing, let me think what her first name is. Daisy Gatson Bates. Sorry, I lost her first name for a moment. And she was, again, a civil rights icon. They're also, by the way, replacing both of their statues. So Johnny Cash is also going in. And we were a little nervous about, we think it's beautiful that Daisy Bates is going in. She owned her own newspaper publication. And she was a voice, because she had a voice, right? Because she had this newspaper, she had this beautiful opportunity to champion civil rights and human rights. And she's being recognized for that. We were a little nervous because she is being created in bronze, as is, I believe, Virginia's statue, but her maquette is already completed. But we do have the assurance that, maybe this is wrong, maybe this is selfish on my part and, self-serving, but I do want Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune to be the first. So I'm happy she is, I must confess, but very happy for the state of Arkansas that they're recognizing Daisy Bates, and proud that she'll be in Statuary Hall. The other woman that you might recognize, Barbara Johns, her statue will be of her when she was 16 years old, because she was the woman who protested unequal schools between white Americans and African Americans, Caucasians and African Americans. She saw such a difference in the in the level of standards and conditions in schools that she protested. And so her protest led to, it led to the Supreme Court ruling in actually, which was actually in Kansas, and she was in Virginia, but she led to that national Supreme Court ruling that said all schools must be of the same standards, that we can't have standards for one school and standards for another based on who goes to which school. And so she will be a bronze statue of Barbara will be as a 16-year-old girl. And so that's the statues that we have of women now in Statuary Hall, and the 3 women that will be coming in Statuary Hall. And then, of course, our 3 suffragettes that are now, as they should be, proudly displayed atop their marble in the rotunda. Thank you so much for having me, Carla, and thank you for asking me to join you tonight. And I'll take any questions, and I hope I can answer them. If not, I'll be completely honest and tell you that we'll all have to do a little bit more research, but it's my pleasure to have been with you this evening. Thank you.
Nancy, could you undo your screen share so we can, and everybody can get their video back up and be seen, especially if they have questions?
Oh. And
Carla?
Yeah, I should get my video back up. Well, I am just delighted that you gave us this presentation. What an amazing revelation to find out who these women are. I've heard of very few of them. And I was particularly surprised that 2 of the women were Native American, and wonder, are there men who are also Native American represented by any of the states?
Well, that's a great question. And the answer to that is yes. Now, I haven't gone back through all of the statues to determine that, but I can tell you that just in 2019, the state of Nebraska replaced one of their statues with, is it Running Bear? Let me think for a second. Chief Standing Bear. Chief Standing Bear, who was instrumental in Native American rights and Native American and Caucasian American relationships in Nebraska. He was just unveiled in 2019. Beautiful, beautiful bronze statue.
Well, that's heartwarming to know that those 2 women in particular, who really are such an integral, interesting part of our history, were given that honor by their states to be in Statuary Hall. I want to point out to any of our members, if you have questions, put them in the chat. And I have another question. Esther Hobart Morris, do you know the story of, she was instrumental in helping women get the right to vote, and the first state to pass that, I believe, was Wyoming, and it was 1869, which is a long time before women across the country were given the right to vote. And it was my understanding from doing research during that anniversary celebration that women were given the right to vote as kind of a lure to get women to the frontier, because men went, they wanted to explore the West and settle the West, and then they found themselves without women. So did you happen to run across that story?
You know, Carla, I didn't. It sure wouldn't surprise me, but I did not run in. But yes, isn't that interesting that in Wyoming you could, of course, your vote in the, you know, in the scheme of things, isn't that really wonderful? And I think that's a great point to point out that the state of Wyoming, women were voting much earlier than the rest of us could. And they were voting in local and national elections. That's a great point. I'm so glad you pointed that out, because that's really remarkable in the state of Wyoming.
When we were putting together, Anne and a group of our members put together a display at the Historic Society, and I had a team of people who helped to work in the library. And when we were putting it together, we all found this amazing poster that had the lamp of liberty in the West, trying to pull the East to also come along and give women the right to vote. And I'm so delighted that they picked her because she really represents so many of our aspirations all rolled into one.
Yeah.
And another one is Jeanette Rankin. And if I'm not mistaken, she was the person who got arrested for voting.
Yeah, I believe you're right on that. Yes. And that she was,
And then was able to actually run for office. And I was
she actually
curious-
ran twice, you know.
Yes. And I was curious to know, she stood
Yeah.
her ground and said, this is my principle. I do not believe in war. Have men ever done the same thing? Are you aware of any men?
Interesting. No, I don't know the answer to that, but that is an interesting question. I'd love to know the answer to that. Yes. And isn't that remarkable and interesting that 24 years later, she ran, won, voted against World War I, ran, won 24 years later, and voted against World War II.
I can't imagine how heavy that weighed on her heart.
Yeah.
And so many people, because of course, the thought that we would ever have a second world war or end up where we are, it's baffling. And there was one other thing I wanted to ask about. Did you actually say that Congress passed a law to put the suffragettes in the closet? That they passed a law?
Well, they passed, it might have been a resolution, but it was a congressional act that moved that statue. And that's verifiable at the Smithsonian. So yeah, because I couldn't believe it either. I was like, you are kidding me. The next day, Congress passed the legislation, whether it was a resolution or a law. You know, I don't want to misspeak here, but yes, Congress acted upon that monument and moved the statue down to the closet. It's crazy. Heartbreaking. Yeah. Yes, I see you. Yeah, Maritza's going like this. Yeah. And to scrape off that inscription. And then in 1997 to say, okay, we'll let you bring that back upstairs. We'll let you put it in the rotunda, but we're not paying for it. So they had to raise the money for that $75,000 to move that statue. And I'm all about moving statues right now. I know it's expensive and difficult. And but they had to do it themselves instead of have it a part of the budget of the rest of those millions of dollars that oversee, the facilities at the Capitol.
So when we talk about the vote and the fight we had to get the vote, it's just one of the pieces of the struggle of being a woman in America. And one of the amazing things is how many women stand out over all those years. Women who fought so hard and never got to see that women were given the vote, who passed away long before it happened. And they kept fighting, many of them for their entire lives. And so here we are. We've got monuments to them that most of us would not have known about if you hadn't brought the information to us. Yeah. So I see there's another comment in the chat. Let me see what this is. Oh, what would it take to restore the inscription to the sculpture? And then the second question is, do you know who the author of the quote is? And I think you mentioned who the author was.
No, I don't know. It might be the artist, and the artist was Adelaide, or I've seen the name of the artist before in in the things that I've read about the sculpture itself. So it had to have been either the artist or given to the artist. That would be a wonderful project to sort of research that. I don't know the exact answer to that. And yeah, and I'm kind of surprised myself that it's not engraved. But of course, I can ask while I'm up there in July.
All right.
Please.
It would be wonderful to know if there was a group of people working on that, so that we could encourage our legislators to know that we would prefer that it be replaced.
Yeah. I'll ask my friend Jane Campbell, She's the executive director of the U.S. Capitol Historical Society. They do a lot of programming, by the way, so that's a resource for all of you. And she was on the call this morning, and they have already done some programs regarding Mary McLeod Bethune and many others. And so I will ask her that, and if I get that answer, I will email Carla and Ann, and then they can pass that along to you.
Wonderful, wonderful. We'd love that. And Olga said Barbara Johns of Virginia was instrumental in getting the 1954 case to integrate schools. The Attorney General building in Richmond is dedicated to her.
Oh. Yes.
I did not know that.
Yeah. And then Brown versus the United, right? Is it Brown versus Board of Education. Thank you. That she was instrumental in that case, her work and her high school, and that case was instrumental in Kansas getting Brown versus the Board of Education decision, which came out and said
there were 5 cases that were merged to become Brown versus Board of Education. She was the one that led out of Southern Virginia.
Yeah. And isn't that remarkable? At 16, she did that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she started at 16, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. She died young.
Well, are there any other questions? I
Thank you
cannot
for
tell
this.
you how informative this has been. What remarkable women have been representing us in the halls of Congress, and we were not aware of it. How delightful. I think everybody here is now ready to go make a trip and take a look at them when the opportunity arises. Can everybody give us a little round of applause?
Oh, thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
Nancy. Carla,
so much.
Carla,
Thank you.
Jody has a suggestion that
Oh,
she chat. Jody, do you want to say it?
Unmute. Yeah.
I just didn't.
I see what it is. It says, let's ask USLWV to champion restoration of the inscription. And that's something the board can talk about, and possibly we could craft a letter to send to the national as they have their meeting this summer.
And let's make sure that it hasn't been done already, just to be sure that I haven't missed that information. I would hate for you to do any work on that without us making sure that either it hasn't, or that, let's just do our research on that first to make sure that I'm correct, that it has not been reinscribed, and to see if there's any other information that we need to know before you do that. But I don't believe it's been inscribed.
Well, thank you. We sure appreciate your continuing to inform us and as we go forward. And with that, I will turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Nancy. That was wonderful. I'm given the period in which those statues came forth, I'm almost amazed that there were any women. It's just stunning. But I love the idea of restoring that inscription. I think the league could sponsor a GoFundMe page and take care of that very quickly if that's what was necessary to go ahead and make something happen again. Thank you so much for all you do in this community. We appreciate you being our guest again. We will stay tuned for whatever your further adventures are, and hope you will allow us to support what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
Because it's for a common good. With that, Carla, is there any other programs you want to mention coming up?
Coming up at the end of the month, we have a panel who will be discussing the very sad situation with opioid addiction. With the pandemic, we have had just horrific numbers of situations. It's a huge problem. And we've got a very interesting panel who will be giving us information. Is it the 28th, Ann? The 29th.
29th, I believe.
Right, and that's another hot topic due to the scheduling, so it will again be at 5:30. Keep an eye out, Ann will be sending you your constant contact, and, you know, again, click, and as soon as you have registered, you will get the link, and put that link in a file someplace so that it doesn't get lost, because it's so much easier if you can just go to the file later. Then we have in April, we have someone who is going to speak to us about ranked choice voting. That's an interesting topic. And it's also kind of a confusing one. So it's an opportunity to learn about that. And quite honestly, I can't remember what the other program coming up in April is. Does anybody remember?
Oh, look.
Well, we're all going to have to just pay attention because I'm drawing a blank. And I know we do have two programs. And I'm very excited. Our annual meeting is May 14th. And we have Mark Lane returning to us to give us his impression. Everybody loves to listen to Mark. He gives us the Mark Lane version of the legislative events that happen and kind of the view of the county from his perspective. So we're looking forward to that. And that, of course, is our only meeting where we elect our new officers and do our business. Yes, Ann.
The meeting is April 9th and it is natural resources.
Oh, I'm so
It's a
sorry.
Saturday.
Yeah, it is.
It's one of your former babies.
Yes. We have Earth Day in April, and that's why we have natural resources coming to us. They're going to be discussing the issue of growth in the community on the environmental impact and how we're addressing some of those questions. It's a hot issue for so many people as we drive around and see all the clear cutting going on. I happen to live in the Loop, like right off of Beach Street, and I've been going to physical therapy with Jim, and so we drive the Loop. We've been doing the actual Loop right along with the bikers. And it is so sad that the rest of the county will never look like this piece of property up here as they clear cut everything. So that's our opportunity to talk about that. So going forward, keep an eye out for the constant contacts that come from Ann, and immediately go ahead and register so you'll have your link. And that's all I have. Mary.
Thank you so much, Carla. Lots of good things coming up. We don't